I don't have much to say.
I saw you working on your notes and your comment.
I don't-
That was for something
I
else.
don't believe it. I don't believe it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, we are live.
All right. Then I will call this October 2nd, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting for Milburn CC School District 24 to order. Madam Secretary, will you kindly call the roll?
John Lorenzen,
Here.
Brendan Murphy,
Here.
Peter Petrini,
Here,
Jillian Phelps, here, John Ruddle, Brad Skepstrom,
Here.
Lisa Wooster.
All right, let's stand for the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any public comment, Madam Secretary?
We do not.
All right. Is there any addition of information or discussion items that we need to add to tonight's agenda? What have done? All right. Information discussion, Math Committee.
Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Gadville, who is on our math committee steering team and will be the presenter tonight. So Carrie is going to present. I'm going to try to keep up with her as we go.
All right, so we have our math curriculum review. I believe this is the first time we've really done kind of a K-8 curriculum review as a whole committee together, usually, correct me if I'm wrong. Yes,
That you are correct.
okay. But math itself has not really been looked at. The last adoption for curriculum was in 2013. Been some time, so we started this process. You can go on to the next slide. So the first step that we did was determine our committees. We have two different types of committees. Our first is the steering committee, which is really overseeing the process, planning timelines, keeping everything moving forward, and making sure we are accountable, along with communicating to the committee members and to the community and the board. Then we have our district committee. The purpose of that is that by the end of the work together, we would have a guaranteed and viable math curriculum that is rigorous and it prepares students for the next math level and beyond school for life. So our district committee is made up of representatives from every grade level, along with an interventionist, special education from K2, 3, 5, 6, 8. And our instructional coaches from both buildings, as well as myself and Dr. Lynn. So we started.
Talk about who's on the steering committee here.
Oh, sure. The steering committee is myself and Jason, and then our coaches. So those, when we meet, we're really, as we talked about, looking at that timeline and just holding ourselves accountable and making sure that we continue to move forward. I'm sure we all know time gets away from us pretty quickly. So the steering committee's job is just to make sure we keep moving. So in June, we had a meeting with the entire committee, and we had 4 main purposes of that meeting. The first was really to learn together, so that we all had a shared knowledge of best practices and math standards. We spent the morning going through that, and then in the afternoon, we analyzed the district's performance in math to identify trends and how we've been performing. We looked at math data, K-8, we looked at IR data 3rd through 8th grade. And then we also evaluated our current math program. So we discussed if the current math program was meeting the district needs. What we did notice with that was that we had inconsistent data between grade levels. And I think over time, when we adopted the last math curriculum, it was right when Common Core came out. And so things have kind of like changed over the time. And what ends up happening is teachers had to start filling in the gaps to make sure that students are getting what they need. So you start to lose that viable math curriculum and ensuring that all kids are getting exactly the same instruction. So that's when you start seeing people turn to teachers pay teachers to find information and things like that. So we determined it was kind of time to start reevaluating what other programs are out there. The other thing we did at this June meeting was we determined the committee's core beliefs. So we'll talk about those in a moment. So as I mentioned, that shared learning, what we focused on in the morning was 3 shifts in math instruction. The first one is focus, where we're emphasizing in the standards so that students gain a strong foundation. So there's key areas of focus in math in different grade spans. So those are listed there. So that was the first big shift that we dove into to make sure we had a common understanding of what that looked like. The second shift is coherence, where you're looking at major topics and how they link from grade to grade. So within that, you're looking at the connection between the learning and that foundation and how it continually builds. You're also looking at conceptual understanding and extensions of previous learning. The other piece that we talked a lot about with this shift is common vocabulary and common processes. So sometimes what happens is people start using, like carrying over, or it might be a different term. So having that common vocabulary helps students to build that, so it's not relearning it every year. So we, that shift in that coherence is really kind of making all those connections so that it's continually building year after year. And then the third shift is rigor. So looking at in each of the major topics that there's conceptual understanding, that procedural skill, math fluency, and then that application. So those are the 3 big shifts for math instruction, and we wanted to make sure we all had a shared understanding of what those pieces look like. And then, as I mentioned, we developed our core beliefs. So we had 4 core beliefs as a committee. We believe that coherence, focus, and rigor are equally important for math instruction. We believe our students and teachers can communicate their learning by using common math language in our K-8 curriculum, and I'll come back to that as I highlighted. All students are capable of learning math at high levels, and we believe it is important to know the progression of standards across grade levels for proper alignment. So that K-8 curriculum piece, this is a big conversation, because right now, elementary uses Into Math and 6th through 8th uses Glencoe Math. We had a conversation around if we wanted to keep them 2 different programs or a K-8 program. And the committee really felt strongly about that K-8 because of that coherence piece. So making sure we had that common vocabulary and those common processes all the way through K-8 in our district. And then the other reason for that K-8 curriculum was movement. So sometimes we have students moving, whether it might be from special education, instructional to back to gen ed, or vice versa, or even you might have students moving from gen ed to accelerated, or maybe even opposite. But with that coherence and that common K-8 curriculum, that shift is easier to do. All right, so then that was all June. That whole meeting was all in June. Now we move to August. We met for a half day in August to analyze different programs. And we focused on that K-8 continual curriculum. There is a website called Ed Reports, and that was kind of our launching point to narrow down our programs. I put up there are 2 that we currently use, because I just wanted to show you what we were really looking at. So there's an alignment aspect, and then there's a usability. So as you can see, our My Math, we have a meet expectations and a partially meet. Glencoe Math was does not meet and not rated. So we looked at that and said, okay, I think we have a little bit of a problem. So let's look at what else there is out there. Next slide. So on Ed Reports, there's 128 total math programs that are published. From there, we went to K-8. How many are just K-8? 79. Then 29 have that, we really wanted that green area for alignment and also for the usability. So we searched with those criteria and we had 29. And then from there, we dove deeper into those programs. We looked at what other Lake County schools were utilizing. And from all of that conversation, we went down to 10, where then we investigated further. We had different groupings kind of dive into those 10, share their findings, and then the committee from there narrowed down the list to 5. And the 5 that we narrowed it down to were Reveal Math, Eureka Math Squared, Illustrative Math. It's not illustrative. iReady, and then Into Math. So we got down to those 5, and then our next steps were, on September 21st, we had the publishers come out and they each presented for about 45 minutes. It was a very busy day, and the committee collected information on the following areas. We looked at the learning progression at coherence, the design of lessons, student engagement, hands-on manipulatives, differentiation, assessments, technology, support for special populations like ML, special education, acceleration, those sorts of things, professional development, and overall usability. Out of all of that, we had a conversation, and we just made the decision that what the committee would like to pilot is iReady and Into Math. So those are the 2. And so our next steps would be to present it to the board, get approval for those, and then schedule professional development for piloting the programs, pilot both programs across all grade levels. We'll use a rubric to evaluate the effectiveness of both and feedback. And then we'll meet as a committee to discuss the findings, and then hopefully we'll make a decision as to which program we recommend to bring to the board. And that's it. Back. There. Question?
No, already has the diagnostic.
They do.
Does Into Math also have diagnostic?
Into Math uses the NWA program, so both of them kind of, it will be interesting to see what the feedback is. So iReady has a whole, a whole technology aspect and assessment aspect that gives a diagnostic, and then you can utilize that information right within their program. Into Math is connected with NWA, which is what we currently use, so that you can push out some information using that data as well. So Into Math is much more, I would say, like a typical, where it's very much laid out. iReady has a lot more, as we kind of wrote down in my notes, it's a one-stop shop. So there's a lot of things that go with it, which will be a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for everybody. And whereas Into Math feels much more traditional.
Would you consider like going with the iReady computer supplement as opposed to like the Alex or?
I think that's all for the committee to kind of feel what works and what they feel is beneficial. It's kind of what we told them was, because there was a comment of like, well, maybe we won't be purchasing everything, like nothing's off the table. I think we need to determine what is beneficial for the district and what we need. So I think we're just gonna kind of work through it and see what the feedback is from everyone that's piloting.
We have a lot of students who are well above 8th grade by the time we get out of 8th grade. I wouldn't go there.
I'm glad you. So.
That was like a plan.
I know. Thank you, you got my little note. So one of the things we really wanted to focus on was just K-8. So we had a lot of conversation around students that are above that 8th grade level before they leave middle school. That is a high school curriculum. So we're kind of trying to keep that separate, and we're just focusing on the K-8 because they are then at the high school level. So it looks a little bit different, but we did talk a lot about that. And kind of try to keep everybody back to that K-8 mindset of just the general education or instruction.
So there already is a program in place though for that high school level.
Yep.
And that you were happy with it.
Did you want to talk more on that one?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's and part of the reason that we're focusing on the K-8 is what our data is telling us. So if students go through the progression at grade level all the way through, the chance of them getting a 4 or 5 on the IAR is about 27% chance. So that's our core grade level, so to speak, curriculum. So we want to bolster that and focus on what is the best core that's going to get us to as many students as possible past that line, so to speak. As a 4 or 5, not that every child can or should, but we should be pushing as many kids as possible if we can. So that's where that went. As far as the high school's tricky because we feed into 3 different high schools. So, and they have 3 different philosophies on math entering in as freshmen. So what we tried this year, for example, Lakes is integrated math, which means that they take their algebra 1, algebra 2, and geometry and put them all together into teaching them not quite simultaneously, but taking parts of each of them as they progress naturally. So the algebra that you need in geometry, algebra 1, and whatever matches up with geometry, they're teaching that as freshmen, so on and so forth, up through. So in 3 years, they get through all 3 of those subject areas. But that's integrated and it's a different order. So our kids coming from Milburn have a traditional model. In the past, we've had a traditional model where we go algebra 1 honors geometry as 8th grade is our highest level. And then some kids would finish algebra 1 as 8th graders after completing their K curriculum. So trying to match that up has been tricky. So we're trying this year to have 2 sections of integrated math for those kids going to Lakes, and the kids going to Warren and Grays Lake are doing algebra 1. We're trying it.
And then you said piloting both programs at the same time. But then another thing you mentioned was making sure people have a common vocabulary. Are they similar enough that doing them both at the same time is going to confuse them, or?
So what that will look like is, they'll have like a unit that they'll do iReady for, and then they'll complete that unit, and then they'll do into math for the next unit. So, and there'll be 2 teachers for K-8 that will be piloting, so that way there's some of that feedback and collaboration happening.
For grade.
For grade level, yeah. But in regards to the vocabulary, the common vocabulary, that would be more for full implementation when you're continually building, once everybody is utilizing it.
A good question.
And then you said you looked at what other schools in Lake County are doing. How about like nationwide? Is there any data on these? You know, because not every student's going to go to college in this area. They might,
Yeah,
long way away.
yeah. So that's where like that ed reports come in. So that is a national website. They have people that just kind of analyze all these programs, looking at this rubric of, I think there's a lot, maybe like 61 different areas. And so that was why we utilize that. I don't know how many, I mean, I certainly can dig into that, like how many people across the nation use iReady. But that was why we for our launching point, use ed reports.
Any more questions about that portion?
Okay.
Was that it?
Yeah.
There's more slides.
No, that's just my notes, so I didn't move.
Oh.
I'm trying not to have like 10 different PowerPoints in our sheet trying, so I just kept it right there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carrie's doing a great job leading the committee, and the steering committee is doing a great job pushing this and doing all the research behind, so that when the teachers get into these larger committee meetings, we're not just sitting there like, what do we do? Because it's overwhelming to get all this information. How do you pick? The steering committee is really guiding that process behind the scenes, which I appreciate tremendously. They're very, very talented and passionate. It's fun to watch.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. Next presentation. Let's see if we can keep that up.
Yeah, that's hard to follow.
Keep it at the same pace.
Let's try and lower the expectations. Okay, so we want to talk about strategic planning. We talked about it a little bit in the summer. We talked about it again this fall, and then in my goals, this is part of the strategies for engaging the community. So let's talk about an idea that I have for how to do it, and then I'll get your feedback if you have any more something to add or subtract.
Let me, before you begin, let me say, we did sit down and we did talk about it. I have asked Jason to develop the strategic plan. We did have an option if we wanted to hire an outside contractor. I think this is a better option. If the board disagrees, we can do that, but I think Jason's perfectly qualified and he understands the community better than any outside source that we would have to pay extra to do it for us. So now.
Thank you. Yes, I should have looked at that. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I like doing strategic planning and engaging with groups of people, so. It's good. Okay, so a strategic plan is simply what part of this process is that you'll see tonight. In summary, this is a beautiful summary, I think, is reflecting on the past. So what have we done in the last two? This will be the, let's see, one, two. This will be my fourth one. Since starting as superintendent, so that's great. So what did the last strategic plans do? So in these meetings now will be, I'll explain that a little bit later. Saying, hey, what have we done? How does this work? Where are we at now? Let's look at the current reality. And part of accelerating this process a year ahead of time. Typically, we would be looking at this next year, but I think having gone through COVID has kind of shifted our world significantly. So now is a good time. Our goals for clarity for our next steps. Where we're trying to get to is the next steps, and we want to get as many ideas as possible in approaching that. So how do we do that? And why are we doing it? First of all, why? Oops, sorry. It's launching an organization or growing in our case. Process is important. So getting in front of people, getting people together to talk about these ideas and what it's on people's mind is important. If it's alignment around strategic priorities, communicating our goals and strategies and programs. So this is an opportunity to kind of highlight what we do well. And then let's look at, okay, this is what we've done. This is cool. This is awesome. Now here's our next, taking us to the next level. This is what we'd like to do as a community. So I think most of you have been through some sort of strategic planning in your careers before, so nothing too new. Here's a potential timeline that can be a little bit, we can shift it a little bit. I don't have specific dates for meetings in there yet, but this follows the same, approximately the same timeline as the last strategic plan. It seemed to work, except that we're done in the end of January and then February. So kind of put a halt to the operational and goal setting piece on there. So looking at this analyze and investigate portion at the beginning is really getting thoughts, compiling feedback from people about what we're doing well, and where we should head. Then the middle is the goal setting time. So we take a look at all the feedback, all the analytics that we've looked at, to compile that and say, okay, now what do we want to do? And then the board finalizes these at the end. And then you hand that off to the administrative team and say, okay, now it's up to you to put this in action. How are we going to meet these goals? And that's up to us to determine at that point. The board, I've been thinking about this. The board is invited to be as involved as you want along the way. So in the past, some board members have stayed hands off until the end. Some have dove in and been a part of every focus group, not every focus, but every at least piece of the focus groups along the way. And so that's going to be up to you as individual board members to decide if that's okay. If you want to do it as a board, I can consider that as well. You don't have to answer at the moment. Maybe just think about that as we go through this, how we want to do this together. And of course, I would keep the board informed no matter what along the ways. But here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing. Here's what's happening. So that's a timeline. So keep that in mind as where we're headed by the end of the year. February, March to be able to approve the final goals and then hand it off in March, April for implementation for the following years. And this is these are big goals. These are long-term 3 to 5 year goals. It's not this is gonna happen for next fall type goals we want. This is where we're headed. This is what we want to do in the longer term. So there's analysis and assessment. What we're doing is just building knowledge on trends and best practices and existing, what we're currently doing, again, where's some gaps, get some buy-in through some engagement. Lenses to consider throughout the process. Financials, how do our financials align with our aspirations? Equity will be impacted by the decision, staffing, and evaluation. And no, equity is a word that's can be sticky for some people. I want to be sure that we understand what that means in this context. It's about understanding when we make a decision, who's going to be impacted by that decision. So if we change bus routes, for example, or if we change the start time of school, who's going to be understanding who's impacted by this? Or if we add sports or take away sports or add a program, who are the people? And I hate to say winners and losers in those cases, but sometimes there's a give and take. So understanding who that is so that we can communicate that ahead of time is important. I debated today whether or not to use that word or to take that out. So just want to point that out. I don't want to cause any angst. And then to keep in mind along the way, what does success look like and how will we measure it in the end? Because that's the board's job, is to monitor that, to say, okay, we want the best students ever. Okay, great. But what do you mean then? What does that mean? What does that look like? How are we going to use our NWA scores? Are we going to use our IAR scores? Or something others to measure what that looks like? Are we going to use surveys for kids or interviews? What do we use to monitor that progress? And that's where I come in and help and say, look, if you're looking at this metric, or if you want this outcome, this is the metric that we're trying to look at. That's pretty clear. So in this process, there's some challenges to it. That's in managing those challenges is the tricky part and the fun part to me. Consensus over clarity. You can have consensus and we get to the end of it, and all of a sudden a week later we go, what? Wait, what? We all agreed to this, but what does it mean? What does it look like? I don't understand what we were trying to accomplish. So we want clarity in the end to make sure we're all on the same page and we know what it is we're shooting for and what we're measuring, et cetera, et cetera. So it all lines. Who provides input versus who decides is sometimes important. So when parents come in, sometimes we'll get parents on a committee who have an idea of what they would like. And sometimes it's very specific. And they may be disappointed that they don't get to decide that, hey, when I came on this, I wanted to be, I wanted us to add football. Well, if we don't have football, then they're going to be upset. That's not their decision. Their decision, the goal might be, for example, is not to add football. The goal is to increase the number of opportunities for students outside of school or in school. And so football could be one of them, but maybe there's other sports that are better, that are actually realistic and would go to the bottom alignment between mission, action, and finances that might not be financially feasible. So there's parameters that we're all working under and around. So those are some of the challenges that are fun, and process and final product. Sometimes we can sit and spin and talk about process and we can become good friends in the group, but there's no product that's as resulting from that. So we want to make sure that we get to a product in the end. Any questions about that or comments?
A quick comment, my biggest concern is, can you go back one?
Yep.
Is the preparing a long ambitious 5-year plan that sits on a shelf. I think there's a few other teachers in here that probably have done like curriculum mapping, where we just like poured hours into this thing that just sort of went somewhere and we didn't do anything with it. So that's something I'm really concerned with, that we make sure this is implementable and like we have to stay on top of it. That's
Yeah.
my biggest thing. I don't mind working. I mind wasting time.
Yeah, that is a huge challenge for sure. And I hope as we go through and review the plans in the past to say, hey, these things are in place. For example, the STEM lab down the hall, that's in place because it was part of the strategic plan. Our Spanish program at the middle school is in place directly based on the 2015 strategic plan. Our middle school exploratories, or our enrichment classes are directly in place because of the 2015. That was directly out of that, so helping people see that line of this happened because it was put on paper and this became our goal. And going back and reiterating that some more. And you'll see, and I'm going to show you in this second a little bit about that too. So, thanks. So our current mission statement, and you have the mission, vision, and values in front of you, and that you can continue to look at that while we go through this. Dude, this is what we have currently. This is not a strategic plan. We had 3 critical issues that we worked off of that we started to, but didn't ever have a chance to work those out with more specifics and what we meant by that and where we were headed with that. So as you're thinking about this process and moving forward this time, do we need to review and affirm what we have here? Do we need to make changes? How much time do we want to spend on our vision and values? Have they changed at all? Are they comfortable with them at the moment? Don't have to answer that now, but just be thinking about that as we go through this, because that will be helpful for me to know. Because if we're saying, hey, we have to really talk about our mission statement, it just doesn't do anything for me, and the board wants to do a new mission statement, then we start there.
When's the last time it was trained?
It was created in 2015 and affirmed in 2020. So creating a mission statement is about a 3-hour process one night. Are you surprised that I
One
can,
sentence?
Yeah.
that's short.
Wow.
That's short for a mission statement. People can spend, like AbbVie, they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with consultants to come in to work on their mission statement, and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, weeks wordsmithing, and we had it done one
Some
night.
expensive, some very.
Some people said I couldn't do it.
Thought, man.
That was challenge accepted. And we had ice cream, of course. So just something to think about between now and maybe next meeting, just to help me plan to know where you're at, to say start over, or we can affirm, we can live with the mission statement. And vision, values, do we want to do a review and an update of those and have that conversation, because that would be one session, for example. We don't have to spend, like last time we really focused on the vision and values, and those pieces was a big part of that process. That was a couple of days worth. We maybe don't have to do that this time because we have them. We can just tweak them a little bit or review them. And then we can move on to the next step. So it just helps me know what you're thinking.
And when are we gonna do that? Sorry, it came late.
I don't know where, that would be early on in the process, but I can go back. Whoop,
I'll go back on my call.
it's all right, I'm gonna hit it again and again and again. So, that would probably be in the analysis, end of the analysis and investigation phase in December-ish. So I laid out kind of a analyze and investigate, then you sit down and brainstorm some possible goals, and you narrow the goals down to say, okay, this is what we're gonna focus on, our priorities for the next 5 years. Then the board approves that, and then the board hands it off to the staff to say, tell us how we're gonna do it. So that's the mission and values statement. Again, you have it right here. So what we did last time, and I'm just gonna review just quickly, burn through this so you can see kind of the process and how it worked. We started out with the thought exchange of what are some goals and priorities we should consider as we continue mapping out the direction of the district. Just a wide open question. What do we need to do, parents and teachers? We gave it to staff as well. So this is what they said, and you'll kind of understand how this came about on this paper from that. And then there were lots of different steps in between them.
This was the old thought exchange?
This is the old one.
Okay.
So this was in 2019. November, December 2019, somewhere there. Not very many participants. We can do better this time. That's the breakdown. This was a great question. Would you recommend this district to a friend or school to a friend? 99%. Yes, only 2 people said no. That's a really good indicator. So we'll ask that same question again for sure, because I'd like to see how that's changed.
Was there any sort of free response as to why they wouldn't, like taxes are high or?
I'm assuming that would be in the, so these are the front loaded questions on that thought exchange, and then they would go in and give a thought.
Gotcha.
And there were some negative thoughts.
Maybe from people who didn't have kids in the school district anymore too, you know, it'd be nice to break that down, just be able to see that. We're gonna be able to do that now with our
Yeah.
new thought exchange, right?
Yep, and I'm gonna be meeting with the Briargate friends coming up too, so that's an opportunity to get in and get into that community to push that. So there is, and I'm gonna go through this really quick, and I'll send this to you tonight, but just some thought categories. Hiring and retaining teachers was a big conversation back at that point, and still is, I think, a priority. And if you look on our critical issues, future of attracting, retaining, and developing staff, that was a big topic and concern at that time. I still think it remains so, but is that going to be our next highest priority moving forward? Especially when at that time we, pointed out that there's going to be 20% of our staff turning over in the next 5 to 10 years, which we're still in the middle of that process with retirements. So there's going to be some churn. And then when we hire staff to replace retirees, there's still churn because people for different reasons. Some people just don't cut it with the teaching, or maybe teaching's not for them, or our school's not for them. So small class size was a big issue, and always is a big issue for parents. Is that the best thing to focus on as a school district? The best bang for your buck, not statistically, not research doesn't support that, but it's important to parents. So we definitely want to talk about that. And that's one of those things where you say that, okay, here's the parameters. Do you want low class size, or do you want quality teachers? Because that couldn't play. Or do you want certain programs, lower class sizes and more programs outside the classroom or lower class size and less. All of that comes into play. And it's a priority. It's how are we going to work through those questions? Social skills, social emotional was important. Daily PE. We don't have daily PE at the elementary school, but we did add 1 day of PE since that time. So we have 3 days of PE. Again, this was another one about teachers. A little bit about students too. High scores in reading and math, so there's a lot of discussions about children, not just about reading and math, but about the whole child. So the whole, you'll see language in here about the well-rounded lifelong learners that came from whole child, right directly off the thought exchange, and then that led into our discussions when we talked about that in our small groups. Everybody feels welcomed and celebrated. More professional development in teachers, helping children connect face to face in school. So there's a lot of discussion about tech and the impacts on that, and then trying to connect kids and how to build their social emotional skills. I think that's probably going to be another big topic if I were to guess. Supportive atmosphere, social emotional learning, again. Too much focus on testing, iPads, screen time, again, concerned with tech. Some of that was, they spend 80% of their time on screens. It's just not true. But if that's a perception, that's also indicates, hey, we need to educate people on how much time kids are spending, especially at the elementary school, on their screens. It's not as much as people think. Curriculum enhancement, STEM-based activities and writing. That was big and still will be, but we have continued to enhance our curriculum, our STEAM curriculum at the elementary, or STEM curriculum. And we do have a formal STEM curriculum that we're building now that we didn't have a few years ago. Carrie's been involved in that. Again, and Melissa Lawrence, one of our coaches, has really been passionate about that, working with Mrs. Dyke about developing that program so that it's coherent and builds on itself each year, which is really, it's an amazing, if you went to the showcase last year and were able to go with your kids, it's incredible what they do there. A curriculum director. We didn't hire a curriculum director, but we have added additional coaches that work directly with curriculum with the teachers. So I think that's better personally, but that can certainly be a discussion. Again, curriculum. And again, what we're going for is clarity in our next steps. So there's lots of ideas, lots of good ideas. What are the best ideas and what can we do? What should we do? The report is what we're trying to get to.
Jason, you said we hired curriculum coaches.
Instructional coaches.
What is that?
An instructional coach is somebody that works directly with staff on a regular basis to help them improve their instructional practices. So they will work with the staff. Let's say a second grade teacher wants to know how to teach her kids how to subtract double digits or math in general. And said, hey, I need some help here. I haven't, this is not one of my areas of strength. Can you come in and help me develop some lessons on that? The coach would come and work side by side and develop those lessons.
Are they full-time staff or are they
They're full-time
consultants?
staff. They're 3 full-time staff.
No.
So we have K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8.
And they're Their
this year.
full-time job is to go teacher to teacher, helping them.
And they are busy. And they're serve on our committees for curriculum, so it started with our ELA curriculum in the K-5. Her role was to implement that curriculum, to understand it, and then support teachers and as they develop that curriculum. And implement it in their class, because it's new for people. So they're trying to understand how do I do this with this new materials. And for our ELA curriculum, for some people, it was a whole new way of teaching, just the way the class was structured.
Oh, and we had them.
We've slowly added them as we can. How many is this?
We start off as a teacher on special assignment.
And it was just focused on ELA.
Right, as we were transitioning to a pilot for the ELA curriculum, at the same time. Start us on that path, which going into an instructional coach. She was our K-8 instructional coach, our K-5 instructional coach.
Yeah.
And that was probably about.
All right.
Yeah, and then we expanded because we were seeing like, wow, the benefits of it. But it would stretch thin. Number of teachers that we had, but it's really created another position. One of the kids who moved to five that is now in the fourth year. But having two of them, this is the first year or sixth grade instruction.
Do they help the teachers like advance their education as well? Or is
They
it
can
just,
guide them on a path, but mostly it's like a lot of internal coaching. Like they do a lot of coaching cycles where they'll go through some goal setting. And where do you want to go professionally and lead them on that path? There's also a lot of times they're going in there modeling things. They support a lot of our new teachers, especially with curriculum aspects. A lot of modeling and showing us things with them. But you know, I feel like there's a term we're looking for. It's like they have their hands in so many different supporting teachers, supporting the curriculum. They're even involved in part of our MPSS modeling within there, how we support different kids. Like right now, I can tell you, one of the biggest discussions we have at elementary is with the number of kids and how we identify them with the additional support. How do we structure our schedule to make sure I'm maximizing my instructional time? Because we only have a certain amount of minutes per day. So where do we find these little holes that we can make things work? So we do a lot of problem solving with teams, not just individual teachers, but just teams. And I know Administrator Carrie and I meet with them on a weekly basis about where are the needs, where do we need to start creating more opportunities? Is this a widespread issue that you're hearing, or is this more contained to like a certain grade level? And that which kind of helps us kind of formulate plans on a broader end. School.
I didn't know we had them.
They are, we have they're exceptional, talented people. Which
Place
is,
for a teacher to go through, and there's no problem.
yeah, and very helpful in aligning, I think, our curriculum. And they can help with discipline. I know, so if a teacher is struggling a little bit with, hey, my class is getting a little bit rowdy, can you come and help me with some procedures for how do I get it back into a productive learning environment? So they can help in a variety of ways, and they're very good at it. And that research, so that came partially out of the strategic plan, so staff development. So when we focus on, hey, how can we support teachers and their craft and get better? That's part of that piece, and research supports that. And it is part of the evidence-based funding model from the state of Illinois. So I haven't talked a lot. I don't think with this group, Brendan may remember more. John, Peter, maybe a little bit, but the evidence-based funding model and how Illinois funds schools and how they come up with what schools should be funded, the level schools should be funded at to have a basic education. That instructional coaches, there's a formula for how many you should have per number of students in that. And we're not quite where we should be yet, but there. And the reason that it's called the evidence-based funding models, there's evidence that when you have instructional coaching, it improves the teaching practices, and if you improve the teaching practices, you improve the learning of the kids. It's how it goes, and they are the direct influence on those teachers in the class. Doing an evaluation, principals and assistant principals do wonderful evaluations and give feedback every year, but that's in the classroom maybe twice. It's not coaching role, and that's a little bit more stressful for a teacher. It's not the best way to really improve instruction. It's a way to have some accountability, but it's not like working side by side with somebody to say, hey, help me out. So I love the coaching model. Part of that is I have participated in a coaching myself for my professional growth, and so I'm all for it. Good question.
Thanks.
So back to our timeline again. We talked about that. So start with analyzing. Really, it's going to be about providing information, and I'd like to do it a little bit broader than I did last time with the community, because we haven't done as much. I don't want to use the word campaigning, but we haven't done as much informational. I don't know, town hall,
Outreach.
some stuff, outreach, thank you. To the whole community, and so many people are new to our community since we've done this. So I think doing it broader to begin with, and then narrow it down to people that want to come in and do that next step would be better. That's just my gut feeling at this point of where we should go and what I'm sensing from people in general, but just a lot of things like instructional coaching. We just don't know. We just haven't gotten that information out there broad enough yet.
You're welcome. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Well, nicely done.
So think on that. I'll send you the presentation just to help remind, and then think about how involved the board would like to be along the way as we step through this, and where you'd like to jump in or just play it by ear. It's cool too.
Right, future agenda items. Yes.
Yes. Strategic planning
Strategic
and
planning.
everything that spins out of that. That'll be a lot.
What sort of a time frame are we looking at for the math program? To evaluate the pilot and then
Oh,
come back to
good,
us?
good question.
Well, we are hoping to do, the first phase of the pilot before winter break, and then the second one, January, February-ish, and then making a decision by March to be able to present to the board. And then, if we have a decision, then full implementation for next fall.
And at the next, so that would be a future agenda item for the next board meeting. I will get, if some have costs to them just for the pilot, because they have to supply the materials and some don't. So I will get a cost estimate for the next meeting for the approval of the pilot so that we can get forward, but we wanted to present it tonight because we want to move. We have to start the process at least, and scheduling some of the staff development because we're at a pretty tight timeline.
All right. Superintendent.
I've done it.
All right.
Just
On the
saw you-
agenda.
Just saw you guys.
Yeah.
Business office report.
I have something.
Good.
Another calendar year, tax levy season is fast approaching. Just like we saw with the budget, the state of Illinois has a couple of statutes that we must follow in terms of the tax levy. So our first reading of the tax levy will be November 13th. We'll go over that in quite a bit of detail. Given some of the questions we've recently had from the public, I'd like to beef up that presentation and maybe include some additional links on our website to help educate the public. So I'll be working on that over the next month. The second row there is a truth in taxation statement. So a tax levy, which is our ask to our property holders within the district for property tax revenue. There's a cap on that. If you exceed 5%, we have to do something called the truth in taxation statement, which we likely will be doing because the tax levy calculation, which we'll go through in quite a bit of detail, November 13th. But since that calculation takes into consideration the prior December CPI, which was over 5%, and because there was quite a bit of, not quite a bit, but there was definitely new construction within our district, we'll be exceeding that 5%. So we'll likely need to have a truth in taxation statement and a public hearing at the beginning of or published at the beginning of November. And then when we get into I think we only have one board meeting in November, we'll review again the tax levy with the board and ask for adoption of it because it has to be submitted to the county and ISB by the last Tuesday in December. So this is just the calendar that we'll be following over the next month. And then my only other item really is that Dr. Lynn, Tim Smith and I, we started going through some potential school maintenance projects. If you were on the board last year, you might recall that we submitted for what's called the school maintenance project grant. It's basically a dollar for dollar matching grant where the state will give us $50,000 for a school project. So we're looking at different projects that are not very large, but within that $100,000 amount that we might be able to consider. So once we work through that, we'll bring it back to the board asking for approval if we want to move forward with that grant. And that was it.
On September 13th, I'll be meeting with some folks from the Briargate subdivision just to talk about taxes. So,
The ones who were here last.
yes, and she agreed to get a group of friends together, so
Do they have a clubhouse over there already, or is
it's
that?
being built right
Is
now,
it?
I think. So we'll meet at the library, which is beautiful. Do that. Something else too, but I forgot again, so that's okay.
Board reports.
Sorry, I was late. I was late for a good reason. I was at our middle school cross-country conference meets and we took first, the girls and the boys both took first place in the conference meet. I know we have even in the elementary school, I know one of the girls is in 5th grade. I'm not sure if we have an elementary 5th grader on the boys team or not, but yeah, it was pretty cool for all of them. I think that's like the 3rd year in a row we've crushed it at the conference, both boys and the girls. Our girls team finished 4 of the top 5 girls were girls, so they just crushed it. So, it was pretty cool. Awesome.
Anyone else? No, short week. That's what happens. All right, do we want to go into closed session?
That's up to you guys.
Might as well. All right, I
It's-
ask for a call to go to closed session for number 9, student disciplinary cases, 5 LCIS 120-2 C9.
I move to go to closed session.
Right. I have a
Second.
Second. Madam Secretary. Call the roll.
We need a roll call.
I believe
Yes,
So, yeah.
Cameron Henson,
Yes.
Brendan Murphy.
Yes.
Peter Petrini,
Yes.
Jillian Phelps. Yes. John Ruggles.
Yes.
Fred Stepstrom,
Yes.
Lisa Worcester.
Thank you. All right.